The reading from today is from Ernest Holmes. He says, "Humanity and divinity will be identical when we recognize divinity in humanity. We must learn to see through the apparent, to judge not according to appearances, to realize that at the center of every person's soul is God who is enthroned. Compassion and caring are the ties that bind us together in mutual understanding and in the unified attempt to uncover the divinity in each other. Compassion is the most gentle of all human virtues, for it is the outpouring of the divine givingness through all."
For today, welcome to those of you who may have just arrived in the sanctuary, skipping all those announcements and things. I see you. So the theme for the month of May is compassion. I care for the poor. And to begin with, I want to address this word poor, because I think probably we all have some different idea about exactly what that means, and I think it would be good to start off the month on the same page, yes? So poverty is not just about money. Poverty means not having enough food, or enough education, or enough health care, or shelter, or even time, some people might say. Now, in the 1990s, the World Bank surveyed over 60,000 of the financially poor throughout the developing world, and they asked them if they could describe what it meant to be poor, what poverty meant to them. Now, the poor did not focus on their material need. Rather, they really alluded to the social and psychological aspects of poverty. The study highlights that by nature, poverty is innately social and psychological and spiritual, and that many poor people are plagued with one or more of those aspects of poverty. The social aspects of poverty are just as important as the material. I mean, can you even imagine going through life alone, without any kind of support structure, such as a family or friends to pick you up when you fall, or people that you could rely on for advice or for encouragement or for accountability? Social poverty exacerbates material poverty. So what might be simply a bump in the road to someone who has a social support structure could be a mountain that could completely derail a poor person that doesn't have that kind of social structure. Spiritual poverty affects the way that people view their dignity or their purpose or their world. Whereas some charities really work to alleviate the poor's material poverty, it is, in order to truly be effective, they really need to consider all kinds of poverty, both the material and the social, spiritual, and psychological. And I think you were going to hear a little later from Carol about what we're doing over these next 3 months, and I think you'll see that we're really trying to touch upon all different aspects of this idea of being poor or of poverty itself. So with that out of the way, my talk title is Compassion. Have you been noticing how the first talk of the month is always the same title as yeah, you guys are onto that. And this talk today is actually part of an important conversation that will continue next week. So today we're going to look at compassion, what it is and what it isn't. And next week we're going to take a deeper dive into how to really cultivate compassion in our own lives and how to powerfully take it into action, since that's the theme of the year, to take it into action in the world. Now, there are a number of ways that we may respond when someone, whether we know them or not, is in the midst of a crisis. Now, some of our reactions might range from apathy to sympathy to empathy or to compassion. Apathy is a lack of emotion. It's a lack of feeling or a lack of interest. It's a state of indifference or actually suppressing some of our emotions, such as concern or excitement or motivation or passion. An apathetic individual has an absence of interest in or concern about the emotional, social, and psychological needs of other people, or even of the world itself. Now, apathy is the most negative of our reactions that we could have, because it really is really stating that we don't really care about people, or we don't really care about animals, or we don't really care about the world itself. Sympathy, on the other hand, is an awareness. We have an awareness and an acknowledgement of the distress in others. So it might really say, I see you, and I feel sorry about your plight. Now, there is inherently some emotional distance between the people that are involved in sympathy. There's some emotional distance where we are not experiencing the pain for ourselves, but simply saying, isn't it sad that that person is going through that experience? Can you feel the distance in that? Now, the caution with sympathy is that it can often dip down into pity. And pity can be experienced as a very negative emotion. It's an emotion that can tend to dehumanize or to belittle other people. It can even come with a kind of a high dose of superiority, in which we feel a desire to, really solve a problem or to rescue the person as if they needed to be fixed, or as if we need to save them from their pain. I'm not saying that sympathy is something that we should stay away from, but simply we need to be aware of our motivation around this idea of sympathy. Empathy takes everything a little bit deeper. It's the ability to experience for ourselves some of the pain that the other person is feeling. Empathy is being emotionally moved by someone else's experience. With empathy, we acknowledge our shared human experience. We recognize and understand that we all feel grief and pain at some point in time in or other in our lives. That's part of the human experience, and we recognize that we are one in that. We don't have to exactly have the exact same events happen to us, but we do need to have the ability to really imagine how that person might be feeling at that moment in time. So empathy is a vicarious experience. It is allowing ourselves to really become tuned into another person's emotional experience. It is saying, I feel what you feel. I feel what you feel. It is the ability to stand and walk in somebody else's shoes is empathy. For example, many of us have experienced some kind of loss in our lives. Maybe a parent or a child or a sibling or a friend. Perhaps some of us have experienced the loss of our house through a natural disaster or even a fire. Or perhaps we've lost a job that we really, really loved. Or perhaps we've lost our sense of health and wholeness because we received a diagnosis that's really scary. Now, if we learn of someone who is now experiencing a similar event, and we remember how we felt around that similar event, then we can imagine how they must be feeling now. Maybe not exactly, but we can imagine what it must be like. We have a moment of feeling that feeling or feeling that emotion right alongside of them, and that's empathy. Empathy begins with an awareness of the other person's emotion or the other person's pain. And we show empathy by acknowledging that emotion or that pain or that grief or whatever it is. And by validating their feelings, we convey acceptance and respect for what they are experiencing. We have to be able to see the world, and maybe even more specifically, this particular experience through the other person's eyes. We have to be willing to put away our stuff, our judgments, or around the situation, or anything, just all of our stuff. We have to be able to put it away in order to be able to really empathize with someone else. We have to deeply listen without simultaneously formulating an opinion about the person or about the situation. Not always easy, yeah? But to really be able to empathize with them, that's what we really have to do. So the invitation is to gain a deeper understanding of someone else's perspective, of someone else's experience, without first calling it good or bad. The invitation is to try not to fix anyone, to not get anyone to stuff their feelings, to tell anyone what they should have or should not have done in that situation. If advice is not asked for, don't already be formulating a response while the person is talking. If comparison is not warranted, then don't come up with stories about how you experienced that very same thing. The invitation is to just be with. Just be with that person. Reverent listening is one of the most effective ways that we can just be with someone. It's one of the most effective ways that will really allow us to demonstrate empathy. Simply listen with all of your attention and with all of your heart, without any kind of distractions, to just be there, be with, be present, be listening with all of your attention and all of your heart. And when we've listened with our hearts, then and only then can we offer an authentic, heartfelt response to that person. Once we've really listened, then we have to be able to communicate our understanding of that person's feelings. So we might say something like, and if it's appropriate, I have been there and I know that it really hurts. Or you could say something like, it sounds like you are in a really hard place right now. Please tell me more. Please tell me more. Now, just listening to somebody isn't going to be able to really create a bridge between you. The invitation is to open up emotionally. And being able to always do that isn't always easy. And while it can be difficult, though, it will be that thing that will allow you to deepen the connection between the two of you. You know? Carol this morning. She's reading the flower dedication. She connected with that place in her that has a child, that felt what Marcy was feeling when she wrote that. And she allowed herself to be vulnerable, to experience what she was experiencing, and really saying to Marcy and to Megan, I see you. I know what you are feeling. That's beautiful. There's a lovely connection, not only between Carol and Marcy and Megan, but with all of us, that she would allow that, open up her emotion. Now, our ability to empathize is directly related to our ability to own our own feelings. We must be able to be aware of our feelings and to really experience them fully without distraction or without trying to numb them in all of the ways that we can do that. We all know a few. Now, we have to be able to acknowledge, identify, and accept our feelings before we can truly empathize with another person. The caution surrounding empathy is that we can often get overwhelmed. We can be overwhelmed by the emotions, the grief, the sadness, the anger, the pain, whatever that we are being with that person. We can get overwhelmed by their emotions. We're often not fully equipped to simply be with them. We don't often know what to say or how to say it. And we can become overly affected by their emotions. You know how that happens. Did anybody get a little teary while Carol was being a little teary? The overwhelm can also come from our own feelings that come up around the experience that we are having. Now, the words empathy and sympathy are often used interchangeably, but the two terms come from two different origins and really have two very different meanings. So empathy is the feeling that we understand and share another person's experience and emotions. Sympathy is defined as the feeling that you care about or are sorry about somebody else's grief or troubles or misfortune, but not necessarily the feeling that we share the same feelings or have shared in the past the same feelings that they are experiencing right now. It doesn't necessarily mean that. A person expresses sympathy but shares empathy. I think that's beautiful. Of the two, empathy is a much deeper feeling, but really sympathy can be just as honest and just as heartfelt. We just have to be careful of our motivation around it. Compassion, the word of the day, the word of the month, is a word that's used to express, really the same feeling as empathy. As with empathy, we can understand the person's pain, and we are able to place ourselves in their shoes. Yet when we feel compassion, we also have a desire to take action. This is what makes it different from empathy. We have a desire to take action. It's a deep awareness of the suffering of others, coupled with a desire to alleviate that suffering. Now, this involves a leap of imagination and a willingness to go beyond the borders of our own experience, go beyond the borders of our judgments. This action, whatever it is, whatever we decide to do to make some kind of a response, could involve a physical action. But it really could be something as simple as energetically wishing the person well. Now, if we have experienced, let me say this first, that sympathy and empathy are really aspects of compassion. They're They're wrapped up in this idea of compassion. So the three are related, but they're not the same. So, for example, if you know someone who has experienced the loss of a loved one, you might say to them, I am sorry for your loss. That's sympathy. If you have experienced the loss of a loved one and remember what it was like, then you are able to walk in their shoes. You are able to experience re-experience the feelings that you had and to know what they might be feeling. So in that space, it's possible for us to identify our personal experiences and relate them to that person. Now, this is showing empathy to the individual. It's a passive emotion, and it doesn't require any action from us. Nothing at all. Now, if we show the individual compassion for their loss, then not only will we understand and identify with the same feelings, but we will feel some kind of need to alleviate their grief, to alleviate their pain. For example, we could offer prayer, or we could send them flowers, or we could donate to their favorite charity, or we could call them to check up on them, text them, send them an email. We could take some of the pressure away by doing something for them that would alleviate some of that pressure, such as making a meal or two for the family. Compassion is more cognitive in nature. There's a sense of awareness that provides some necessary space between the two people. Compassion allows the individual to be more present and more supportive than the individual who experiences empathy alone. Remember that empathy can become, at times, overwhelming. So I don't know if this is like the desire to do something is like, letting the steam out of the tea kettle or something. It really allows us to care without losing ourselves. Compassion is empathy with wisdom. We open our hearts to the other person without becoming overwhelmed, without losing ourselves. Their pain does not become our pain. Compassion says, I feel what you feel and it doesn't overwhelm me. I'm able to stand in my inner wisdom and I'm able to modulate my emotional state. So there's a little bit of distance, but it's different than the distance with sympathy. You're right there with them, but you aren't becoming overwhelmed. As we cultivate true compassion, then we learn to be able to detach. And this doesn't mean that we don't care about things or about people or about the world or about the planet. We're still experiencing strong emotions and can be deeply involved with other people, but we learn to maintain perspective. We learn to view the entire situation from a higher view, from a bigger picture. We're able to be with others, to listen to their pain, and to walk in their shoes without becoming overwhelmed. Shifting from apathy to compassion involves making a conscious choice. Living a compassionate life can be learned. We can cultivate it, and we're going to talk about that next week. But for now, I'm just going to say that to shift from empathy to compassion in our lives, there are a few things that we can do. Number one, the first is to recognize that there is a difference between empathy and compassion in the first place. The second is to acknowledge to ourselves what the other person's emotional tone and experience is in the moment. To acknowledge to ourselves about that. Number three, identify in ourselves what we are experiencing within ourselves in response to what is happening with the other person. Number four, affirm to ourselves, he or she is over there, I'm over here. I'm not feeling what he or she is feeling. I'm not experiencing that directly. I'm not having his or her experience. He or she is. And number 5 is that once we have taken this opportunity through these first 4 steps to really take a mental step backwards to really remind ourselves of our separateness from what we're witnessing, not our separateness from the person, but our separateness from what we are witnessing, then the invitation is to ask ourselves, what does this person need from me right now? Or better yet, you could ask the person, how can I support you in this moment? How can I support you? Christine Feldman, in her book, Compassion, Listening to the Cries of the World, says, it doesn't matter what our spiritual, political, or social background is, we all long for tenderness, understanding, and safety. What gives meaning to our lives is to give and receive the care, sensitivity, and love that nourishes our spirits. When we are young and when we are old, we depend upon the compassion and care of others. When we are ill, hurting, or afraid, it is compassion that restores and shelters us. When all of our certainties, defenses, and supports are stripped away, it is compassion that heals us. Compassion is the greatest of all gifts that you can offer to or receive from another. Karen sang about that. So compassion means to endure something with another person, to put ourselves in their shoes, to feel his or her pain as though it is our own, to generously enter into his or her point of view, and then to act. And then to act. There's a poem called Bird's Foot Grandpa. I think I've told this before, but you may or may not remember it, but it's a perfect story. So the poem is about a boy and his grandfather, and they're driving on a country road in a torrential downpour. And the grandfather keeps stopping the car and getting out and scooping up handfuls of toads that are all over the road and gently taking them over to the roadside. Now, after the 24th time of stopping the car, the young boy begins to get very impatient. And he says to his grandpa, "You can't save them all. Accept it. Just get back in the car. We've got places to go to." And the grandfather, knee-deep in the wet grass with big old handfuls of toads, just smiles at his grandson and says, "They have places to go to." So this is compassion. The grandfather didn't mind stopping those 24 times. He didn't mind getting wet to save the toads. He even didn't mind his grandson's impatience because he was very clear in his heart that those toads had just as much desire to live as he did. He was aware of and moved by the toad's distress, and he took action. Martin Luther King says, we must all learn to live together as brothers, I'll add, and sisters, or we will perish together as fools. This is the greatest challenge of the hour. This is true of individuals. It is true of nations. No individual can live alone. No nation can live alone. So for me, what I think that we need to live as brothers and sisters is compassion. If we don't care for one another, if we don't care for the poor, we're all going to suffer. Compassion really applies to all areas of our lives. Compassion for ourselves, compassion for our family, compassion for our friends, compassion for our classmates, compassion for those people that we work with. Our communities must have compassion for other communities. Our nations must have compassion for other nations. Our races must have compassion for other races. Our religions must have compassion for other religions. We all must have compassion for the animals on the planet, and we all must have compassion for the planet itself if we are going to create a world that works for everyone. It's the greatest gift that we can ever give or receive. And what I know beyond a shadow of a doubt is it's that spark within us. It is that light within us. Compassion is a God quality. We arrived on the planet with it. The only choice is whether we're going to express it or not. The only choice is whether we're going to allow it to be expressed through us. It's an amazing healing energy that begins within, and it's shared from the inside out. And it may feel at any given moment like, we're only one individual. And what can we as one individual do? How can we make a difference? But the truth is that we do. The truth is that we do make a difference, whether we are aware of it or not, each and every time that we choose compassion, that we consciously choose compassion. Now, so the invitation today is to remember that compassion is who we are, to remember that it is a choice, and to remember to simply choose it. And so it is. So I invite us all to turn within, to just turn within for a moment, to allow us to anchor this message in a moment of prayer. And with my eyes closed, I am acutely aware of that presence of God that is within me, that spark of the divine, that Christ consciousness that is at the core of my being. And I know that not only is it within me, but it surrounds me. It is everywhere I look. It is all of the things that I can see and all of the things that I cannot see, for God is all that there is. I am one with it. And just as I know that that is true for me, I know that it is true for each and every single one of us here today, every single one of us at home. That we are connected to God, to life, and to each other by this golden thread of God's stuff that weaves itself throughout all of life. And it's from that place of deep connection that I speak these words of prayer for each of us today, truly knowing that we are spiritual beings having a human incarnation, that we have within us that spark of the divine, that compassion is who we are at our very core. And I claim for each of us ease and grace around bringing this to everyone in our lives, those that we are close to, our family, our friends, and those that we may have never even met. I claim that we do this with ease and grace, both individually and collectively, as this Triangle Center for Spiritual Living. That we open our hearts and open our minds to a new perspective, that we see the bigger picture, and that we allow ourselves to stand in another person's shoes, another community's shoes, another nation's shoes, and to really act from that place, from a deep awareness of our connection, from a deep awareness that we are more alike than we are different, that we all feel pain and grief and sadness at some point in time and another, and that compassion is the way that we can heal that, and that it is the greatest gift that we can offer each other and the world. And I'm so grateful to know this truth and to speak these words. So grateful for the power of prayer, knowing that these words are loosed into a law that only ever says yes, that they are clothed in form even as they are spoken. And so I speak them and I release them with full expectation of their manifestation. letting go and letting God be God. And I invite everyone here and everyone at home to anchor this prayer for themselves and for each other simply by saying, "And so it is." Amen. Amen.